Back in the 70s and 80s, when watching the evening news on TV was in, there was a certain series navigated by reporter Charles Kuralt called On the Road. I always looked forward to those spots, and no wonder. Google now reports that in the 20 years that Charles Kuralt did them, he traveled to every state in the Union. One Easter day that I remember, and it must have been before I was ordained, because I'm usually not home on Easter morning watching TV. However, I do remember this one Easter day. He was reporting from a very old and very rural cemetery, someplace, I believe, in Georgia. And the azaleas had just come into full bloom, and they were panning them around up and against the old tombstones. And it was just a significant moment. And Charles Kuralt paused for a moment, and then he said, "This is a good place to reflect today on death and resurrection." I guess you could say the same thing about today, this third Sunday in Eastertide. Charles Kuralt, reporting with his two disciples on the road to Emmaus. On the road to Emmaus. 3 weeks out and 7 miles from Jerusalem. Luke presents us today with a rich tableau of death and resurrection. Death, because Cleopas and chum were really in the death grips of raw disappointment. You could just hear it in their voices. But we had hoped for something vastly different than what we got. A vision of angels and their jagged disbelief. Some women of our group astounded us. That was the death part. And resurrection. Because in the time that it took them to travel to Emmaus and return to Jerusalem, they were so transformed by what happened to them on the road that at the end of the day, they could say, "The Lord is risen indeed." One biblical commentator describes what happened to them on the road in this way. Their burning hearts illumine their blind eyes and quicken their weary souls for a 7-mile nighttime run in the moonlight of Easter. Charles Kuralt would have approved of that description. Death and resurrection. Today's passage is bookended by those realities. But there's also a challenge for us in the everything else that happens to us before our own death and resurrection. Each of us travels this Emmaus road at one time or another in our life of faith, talking and discussing with our fellow travelers, our fellow doubters, struggling to comprehend, why am I here in the first place? And what does it all mean? Jesus is with us every step of the way, every moment along the road. But our eyes are often kept from recognizing him. There's too many things, our achievements, our busyness, many obstacles that stand in our way so that our eyes are kept from recognizing him. It doesn't mean that he's not there. What we wish for in our life is that one convicting experience. We wish to be convinced and convicted. We wish a real encounter with the risen Lord that catapults us into believing that, yes, this is real. God is alive. Long live God. Isn't that always the way? What do you remember most about your experience of God? I'll wager it's not one of those Christian doctrines that you memorized from the catechism. in preparation for confirmation. I'll wager it's not an argument that you won with someone who was on the side of science, letting you feel like you're isolated on the side of faith. Perhaps it was a moment in Sunday school, oh so long ago, when you felt so strongly the presence of God, conveyed by a loving teacher or a caring classmate. Significant and abiding experiences of God come through this personal encounter, like the one Cleopas and his chum experienced today. And that's as it should be. God means for us to recognize him, not just in our heads by reciting creeds or memorizing commandments, but whenever we feel our hearts burning within us. Maybe that occurs when we share some food together and we look across the table and we see a sister or a brother in Christ. Maybe it occurs when we have a nanosecond of silence when we're forced to sit in stuck traffic. That's one good thing about stuck traffic. We're forced to stop and think and listen. Speaking of listening, maybe it occurs when we listen to our teenager and we realize a breakthrough. We realize we're on the same page. We understand and love one another. And most especially, it can occur when we come together every Sunday to take, bless, break, and share the holy bread of Holy Communion. How can you count the ways that you have experienced the risen Lord in your daily lives? Because if you don't look for him there, one day at a time, going along your Emmaus road of death and resurrection, of highs and lows, of fullness and emptiness, of sense and senselessness. If you don't look for him there, you'll never find him in the textbook. Today, as you leave this place and go to walk your Emmaus road, may you be so transformed that at the end of the day, you can say, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he has appeared to me." Alleluia.